The light rain was gently falling in the afternoon, creating a rare cool atmosphere amid the towering skyscrapers of the city center. Alexander Blake, CEO of the world's leading tech conglomerate, hurriedly exited a large building, his expression cold and stern. Today had been a challenging day for him, and the scandal surrounding his poor decisions at the company was unavoidable, bringing an endless flood of media attention. Journalists crowded outside, desperately seeking the hottest scoop. Alexander quickly headed towards his car, but his mere appearance attracted the crowd's attention. Meanwhile, Emma Carter, an ordinary girl passionate about art, living a simple life, was working in a small cafe located nearby. She wore a simple blouse, her long hair falling loosely, as she carefully carried a coffee tray and moved gracefully between the wooden tables of the cafe. This cafe was her sanctuary after long hours of work, and also the place where she nurtured her dream of hosting her own art exhibition. The chaotic scene outside the cafe didn't distract Emma. She continued her work, delivering coffee to customers with a gentle smile. However, the calm didn't last long. As she walked past the cafe door, a tall man, dressed in an expensive suit, with a furrowed brow and piercing eyes, suddenly collided with her. A loud sound echoed as Emma's tray hit the man, causing several coffee cups to spill onto his suit, creating a large wet stain. Emma froze, staring at him, completely taken by surprise. Alexander stepped back, feeling furious. His high-end suit, which he had just bought for an important event, was now soaked. His short, dark hair was slightly damp, and his eyes burned with anger. "Damn it," he growled, looking down at his suit. "Are you blind? What were you thinking?" Emma didn't flinch or panic. She simply gazed at him with a calm, indifferent expression, showing no sign of fear or concern. To her, he was just a man with a wet suit. Nothing more. "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are," Emma replied coldly, her voice firm and direct. "You're not the first person to spill coffee on me, and you certainly won't be the last." Her words struck Alexander like a thunderclap. He stared at her in disbelief, unable to comprehend that someone would respond so indifferently. A man like him, someone whom everyone usually respects and fears, was now being ignored by a simple girl. This left him completely perplexed. "Who the hell do you think you are to talk to me like that?" he snapped. Emma didn't immediately respond. She quietly looked into his eyes before turning to walk towards the counter to grab some napkins. Although there was no hint of fear in her demeanor, she knew she couldn't just stand there without addressing the situation. "You should probably handle this before it becomes a bigger issue," Emma said as she returned with a clean napkin. She gently wiped the coffee stains from his suit. Unfazed. "And if you need, I can help you find a laundromat nearby." Alexander studied her intently, a mix of anger and confusion filling him. Part of him wanted to lash out more, but he couldn't deny that her calmness made him feel strangely uncomfortable. He was used to people being afraid of him, to people apologizing when they upset him. But Emma, this girl, simply didn't care. "I don't need your help," Alexander replied coldly. "I'll handle it myself." Emma gave him one last look before returning to her work. As Alexander stood there, staring at her, he felt something he wasn't accustomed to: confusion. There was no trace of fear in her eyes, no hint of awe or reverence for him. And that was both unsettling and intriguing. This wasn't the first time he had encountered someone who didn't know who he was. But no one had ever brushed him off so completely. No one had ever acted so dismissive towards him. Who is she, he thought. Still staring at her back. Does she know who I am? And perhaps, in a world full of calculations, reputation, and power, Emma Carter's indifference was the most unsettling thing he had ever faced. 3 months had passed since the unexpected and tense encounter between Alexander and Emma. Their lives seemed to continue on their familiar paths. Alexander remained the powerful, cold, and determined CEO, leading his tech empire with sharp decisions. Emma, the art-loving girl, continued working at the small cafe while nurturing her dream of one day hosting her own art exhibition. However, fate had arranged for them to cross paths again. This time under entirely different circumstances. That evening, a grand banquet was being held at an upscale conference center, organized by Alexander's corporation. Every detail of the event was meticulously planned. From the gourmet menu to the VIP guests from various industries. Alexander was present as the host. Dressed in an expensive suit. His face full of determination. He knew that tonight, all eyes would be on him, not just because of the event but also due to the scandals surrounding him. Emma had been hired as a server for the event. After receiving the offer to work extra hours, she couldn't turn down the opportunity to earn some extra money. Although no one could have predicted that her presence would cause such a commotion. She wore a simple yet elegant serving outfit. Her hair neatly tied up. Despite this being her first time attending such a large-scale event, Emma remained confident and worked diligently. However, among the bustling crowd, an unfortunate accident occurred. As Emma moved between the tables, she accidentally bumped into a guest, causing a wine glass in her hand to fly up in the air and land directly on the VIP table, soaking it with wine. This particular guest was one of Alexander's most important business partners. And the crowd around them immediately turned their attention to her. Everything seemed to freeze. Emma stood frozen, her face pale with shock. She quickly apologized. But she knew that this could very well be the end of her job. Before she could do anything else, she felt the sharp stares of the manager and the murmurs of the crowd around her. It seemed like it was over for Emma. But then, unexpectedly, a voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Don't worry. She didn't do anything wrong. Alexander Blake, CEO of the corporation, stepped forward. His sharp eyes meeting those of the event manager. It was my fault. I'll take responsibility for this. Alexander's words silenced the room. The guests turned to look at him. And the whispers ceased immediately. No one expected the powerful CEO to stand up for a server like Emma. You don't need to do this," Emma said, her voice shaking, feeling both grateful and embarrassed. "I can handle this myself." "No," Alexander replied firmly. "She will not be fired for a small mistake. If anyone should take responsibility, it's me." He turned to look at the event manager, his expression unwavering. The crowd around them, which had been murmuring, grew silent. The manager nodded, clearly not daring to argue with Alexander's words. Finally, Alexander turned back to Emma, offering a small, reassuring smile that made her feel somewhat relieved. "Are you all right?" he asked, his usual stern expression softening slightly. Emma nodded, still feeling embarrassed. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here." "Don't worry about it," Alexander said, his tone warmer than usual. "It's just a minor issue. Anyway, I have something I want to discuss with you." Emma looked up at him, puzzled. What is it? I'd like to offer you a position as my personal assistant for 3 months. Alexander continued. His voice calm and decisive. The salary will be extremely high. Enough for you not to worry about finances during that time. Emma was stunned. Unable to believe what she was hearing. A personal assistant? She. A girl working at a small cafe. Being offered a job like that by such a powerful CEO. The salary was so high it seemed unreal. Are you joking? Emma shook her head. Still not able to process the offer. Why me? I don't have any experience in this field. Alexander smiled. His gaze mysterious. There's nothing to worry about. I need someone who can help me with day-to-day tasks. And I think you could handle it. You have a calm demeanor and self-possession that I don't see in many people. That's why I'm offering you the position. Emma was still in shock. But she couldn't deny that this was an opportunity far too big to pass up. A mix of emotions swirled inside her: surprise, anxiety, and hope. This was an incredible chance. But it was also a challenge she wasn't sure she was ready for. 3 months. Alexander repeated. His tone firm. You can think it over. If you agree, I'll be available to start tomorrow. But remember, this is a rare opportunity. Emma stood there, her mind racing with doubts and questions. But despite her uncertainties, she couldn't deny that this offer would change her life forever. Emma sat in her small, dimly lit apartment. The same room she had lived in for years. The walls, painted in soft hues of beige, bore the weight of her dreams, dreams that always seemed just out of reach. She glanced at the sketchbook on her desk, filled with unfinished drawings and ideas for her future art exhibition. But at the moment, her reality felt far removed from her artistic ambitions. The bills piled up on the table, a constant reminder of her financial struggles. The offer from Alexander was still fresh in her mind. The high salary, the prestige of working for someone like him, and the opportunity to step into a world she had never even dared to imagine. But she couldn't shake the discomfort she felt about the idea of joining the elite. Of becoming part of a world that seemed so cold, distant, and unrelatable. She had always believed that true value came from hard work and passion, not wealth and power. She had seen enough of the world's superficiality while working at the cafe and knew that the people at the top rarely cared for anything but their own success. Yet, her circumstances were dire. The money she could earn in 3 months with Alexander would change her life. It would give her the chance to focus more on her art. Perhaps even fund her dream exhibition. She couldn't afford to let pride stand in her way. Not when her dreams and survival were at stake. With a sigh, Emma picked up the phone. She had avoided calling Alexander ever since their meeting. But now there was no other choice. She dialed the number, her fingers trembling slightly as she waited for him to answer. Emma Carter. Alexander's voice came through, crisp and professional. Yet there was a hint of surprise in it. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I've thought about it. Emma replied. Her voice steadied despite the butterflies in her stomach. I'll take the job. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before he spoke again. I'm glad to hear that. I'll send the details to your email. You'll start tomorrow. Emma hung up, the weight of the decision settling over her. She was about to step into a world she never wanted to be part of. But she had no other choice. The dream of her art exhibition was too precious to abandon. And if this job was the way to make it happen, she would have to endure whatever came with it. The first day on the job was nothing like Emma had imagined. The office was stark and sterile. with towering glass walls offering a panoramic view of the city below. The atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Employees scurried around, their eyes glued to their screens. The hum of the office almost deafening. It was a world that felt like it was built on rules she didn't understand. She was introduced to the team and quickly realized that Alexander ran a tight ship. Everything was about efficiency, precision, and results. There was no room for mistakes, no tolerance for weakness. She was given a list of tasks, ranging from managing his schedule to handling some of his more mundane requests. As the day wore on, Emma felt the weight of his expectations pressing down on her. Every conversation, every task, felt like a challenge she wasn't sure she was equipped to handle. But it was Alexander himself who made the situation even more intimidating. His presence was overwhelming. He rarely smiled. His face always set in a cold, almost emotionless expression. When he spoke, his voice was sharp and direct, demanding nothing less than perfection from those around him. He didn't seem to care about personal lives or feelings, everything was about the job. As Emma delivered documents to him and coordinated meetings, she couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between his demeanor and her own personality. She was used to a slower pace, one where people actually cared about each other. But here, it seemed like the only thing that mattered was performance. And any hint of vulnerability was swiftly dismissed. One afternoon, as Emma was helping Alexander prepare for a crucial meeting with a potential investor, she caught a glimpse of his true nature. He was arguing with a senior executive about a contract that was far from being finalized. His tone was icy, his words cutting. "If you can't deliver on this, then we're done here," Alexander snapped, his eyes never leaving the screen in front of him. The executive stammered, trying to justify his mistakes. But Alexander didn't even flinch. It was like he had no capacity for empathy, no understanding of failure as a learning process. Emma watched from the doorway, her heart racing. She couldn't understand how someone could be so ruthless, so relentless in their pursuit of success. She had seen harshness before. But this was something else. This was a cold, calculated precision that seemed to leave no room for mistakes, let alone humanity. After the meeting, she was left alone to clean up the aftermath. As she walked through the halls, her thoughts swirled. She wondered how a person could live like that, so detached from the world around them. But she couldn't deny the results. Alexander had built a fortune, a massive empire from sheer will and determination. He had no room for softness or emotions, at least. That's how it seemed. As the days went on, Emma found herself growing more and more conflicted. She still couldn't understand Alexander's need for perfection, his unyielding approach to everything. But there were moments, brief flashes of something more, that made her question her initial assumptions about him. She noticed that, despite his cold exterior, Alexander always took time to personally address important matters. He didn't delegate everything. When something truly mattered, he was there, with his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. But there were times, especially when he was alone in his office, that he seemed more vulnerable, moments when the facade slipped. And she saw glimpses of a man who had been through something difficult. Someone who wasn't as invincible as he wanted the world to believe. It was on one of these rare occasions, as she was organizing his desk, that she overheard a conversation he had with a trusted colleague. His voice, usually so controlled, cracked slightly as he discussed something personal. For a brief moment, Emma saw him not as the feared CEO but as a man burdened with his own demons. It was then that she realized, there was more to Alexander Blake than met the eye. For the first time, she understood why he was the way he was. His coldness, his detachment, they weren't signs of strength, but rather shields to protect himself from a world that had hurt him. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way she could help him find warmth again. But for now, Emma knew her place. She was here to do a job, to earn money for her dreams. She wasn't here to save anyone. Still, the growing warmth she felt toward Alexander was undeniable. And it was starting to make her wonder if there was more to this partnership than just business. It had been a few weeks since Emma had started working as Alexander's personal assistant. And though she was growing accustomed to the high-paced, cutthroat environment of the corporate world, there was still much she couldn't wrap her mind around. Alexander, despite being the most powerful man in the room, still seemed like an enigma, a man who kept his emotions tightly locked away, who never revealed any hint of vulnerability. But things started to change one quiet afternoon. It was an unusually slow day at the office, with most of the team busy with off-site meetings. Emma had just finished organizing a few files when she received an email from Alexander asking her to join him for a brief meeting. It was rare for him to call her into his office for anything beyond routine tasks. So she knew this wasn't going to be just another mundane errand. She walked into his office, where Alexander was seated at his desk, staring at the window that overlooked the city. For a moment, he didn't say anything, as if lost in his thoughts. The usual cold, commanding presence he exuded was absent, replaced by something more subdued, almost distant. Emma hesitated but then took a seat across from him. "How are you settling in?" Alexander asked, his tone softer than usual, almost as if he were genuinely curious. "I'm managing," Emma replied, her eyes scanning the office. The usual immaculate setup of his space seemed less imposing today. There was a sense of quiet here that felt different, more human. There was a long pause before Alexander spoke again, his voice lower now. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Emma's eyebrows furrowed slightly. She wasn't sure if this was about work, but she nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Why did you take this job, Emma?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "I know you don't belong in this world. You've made it clear from the start that you're not one to be swayed by money or prestige." Emma's chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to ask such a personal question. She shifted in her seat, unsure of how to respond. She had never been one to openly share her thoughts. But for some reason, she felt like she could tell him the truth. "I took it because I need the money," she said quietly, looking at her hands. "I have dreams of becoming an artist. But, well, bills need to be paid. And my art doesn't exactly bring in a lot of cash right now." Alexander nodded, his expression unreadable. "And yet, you still don't want to be part of this world." His voice was almost accusing, though there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Emma met his gaze, her heart pounding. "I don't fit in with people like you, Alexander. I don't know how you live in a world where everything is about power and money. I guess I'm just not cut out for it." There was silence between them. And for a moment, it felt as if the air itself had thickened. Then, to her surprise, Alexander spoke again, his voice quieter, almost vulnerable. "I know the feeling," he said. "I never wanted to be a part of this world either." Emma looked up, startled. She had never heard him speak like this before. Alexander, the CEO, the man who commanded attention with a single glance, was now sitting before her. His eyes clouded with something she couldn't quite place. Do you know why I'm here? In this office. Running this company? He asked. It's not because I wanted to. It's because I had to. My family, my father, he never gave me a choice. I had to take over the company when I was barely old enough to understand what it even was. His words hung heavy in the air. And Emma couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. She had always known Alexander had a sharp edge. But she never realized the weight he carried behind that exterior. I was never given the chance to have a normal childhood. Emma, he continued. His voice growing quieter still. I spent most of my time alone. In boardrooms. Dealing with people who only saw me as the next successor. The heir to the throne. My father pushed me to be perfect. To always win. To always succeed. But no one ever asked me what I wanted. Emma didn't know what to say. She could hear the bitterness in his voice. The pain that lay beneath the layers of power and control. It was a side of him she had never seen. And it made her realize just how much Alexander had sacrificed to get where he was. Then. When I thought I'd finally found someone I could trust, someone I could love. I was betrayed, he said. His voice breaking slightly. She left me without warning. Without any explanation. The woman I thought was going to be my wife turned out to be just another person who saw me as a means to an end. After that. I swore I would never let anyone get close to me again. Emma's heart ached as she listened. She had always seen Alexander as someone who had everything, someone who never needed to depend on anyone, but now she realized how much he had been hurt. The betrayal of his fiancée had shaped him. Made him wary of love. Made him close himself off from the world. I'm sorry. Emma whispered. Her voice soft. I had no idea. Alexander didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at her. His eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. After a moment. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It's fine. You don't need to apologize. For a while. The silence between them was comfortable. Neither of them spoke. But Emma felt the weight of the conversation settle between them. A bond forming that she hadn't expected. Do you know? Emma. Alexander said. His voice barely above a whisper. You're the only person I've ever felt comfortable with. The only one who hasn't tried to use me or judge me. Maybe that's why I've been so harsh with you. Emma met his gaze. And for the first time since meeting him. She saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, a softness that she hadn't known existed in the man she'd come to know as cold and unyielding. In that moment. She realized that Alexander was more than just a powerful CEO. He was a man. Broken by the weight of his past. And Emma was the first person who had been able to get close enough to see the cracks in his armor. I don't need anything from you. Alexander, she said quietly. Her voice full of sincerity. I'm just here to help you. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time. Alexander believed her. The relationship between Emma and Alexander had blossomed in the quiet moments spent working together. Despite his coldness and ruthlessness in business. Each time they met. Emma noticed something different about him, a vulnerability. A lonely heart. Scars that he could not touch. And it was these things that drew her in. Making it impossible for her to pull away. However. Like all beautiful stories. Their relationship could not continue easily in a world full of prejudice and competition. One day. Emma received a notice from HR informing her that she would need to attend an important meeting with the board of directors. A sense of dread filled her as she entered the conference room. Where the board members sat with sharp eyes and cold faces. We cannot allow someone like you to continue to be by Mr. Blake's side, one of the board members spoke. His voice as icy as the others. Emma Carter. You do not have the qualifications to be the CEO's personal assistant. You do not belong in this position. Emma struggled to maintain her composure. But her heart clenched. She knew that despite her best efforts at work, she was still just an ordinary woman, without the connections or pedigree that would justify her place there. The feeling of being pushed aside for not fitting into this world was painful. We cannot let this relationship harm the reputation of the company, the head of the board continued. Mr. Blake may be lacking clarity in his decisions. You cannot stay here any longer. Emma glanced at Alexander, who remained silent, his eyes staring off into the distance. She could feel the internal struggle within him. But he didn't speak out to defend her. She understood that. As much as he might want to, relationships outside of work could have a devastating effect on the company he had worked so hard to build. Things only worsened when, one morning, a terrible rumor began circulating within the company. Vanessa Parker, Alexander's ex-fiancée, suddenly reappeared, bringing with her a dramatic media campaign. She started spreading rumors that Emma was using Alexander to gain personal benefits, that she was nothing more than an ordinary woman with no career or talent. And her presence beside him was part of a scheme to climb the social ladder. Vanessa's return wasn't just about trying to win Alexander back, it was about destroying the fragile connection between him and Emma. The false stories she spread caused not only the board members but also employees within the company to view Emma with suspicion. Emma felt isolated and alienated, left to face a world that had turned against her. The sense of betrayal and humiliation overwhelmed her. Even though she loved Alexander, even though she understood him better than anyone else, she couldn't let him face these pressures on her behalf. His company, his career, all of it was more important than her. If she stayed by his side, things would only get worse. Their relationship would continue to put him in an impossible position. One evening, as Alexander returned from a tense meeting, Emma made her decision. She had been preparing for this moment for some time. She wrote a short letter, explaining why she had to leave him. The reason was not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him enough to not want him to suffer any further. Emma's letter. Alexander, you are the one person I haven't been able to stop thinking about since we first met. You're the only one who makes my heart feel alive. But I know that our relationship cannot continue. At least not under these circumstances. The pressures from the company, the rumors, these will only make you suffer more. I don't want to hurt you anymore. I can't continue to be a part of your life if it's just going to bring more stress and doubt. I don't want to be a burden to you. I don't want you to have to choose between me and your company. So, I've decided to leave. As much as it breaks my heart, I know it's the right thing to do. You are strong. And I believe you will overcome these challenges. I will never forget what we've shared. And I will always support you, no matter where I am. Wishing you happiness and success. Yours, Emma. After finishing the letter, Emma didn't go back to Alexander's office. She called a taxi and disappeared from his life. Though her heart felt like the world had shattered. She knew that, no matter how deeply they loved each other, the differences between them were too great. In the end, love could not overcome the challenges that the world outside had imposed on them. She left not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him too much. Alexander stood in the empty rooms of his office. A strange feeling of unease consuming him. Everything had changed in the past few days. Not just for the company, but for his life and his heart. The feeling of helplessness, watching Emma slip away from him, had lingered throughout these dark days. He couldn't take it anymore. He had uncovered Vanessa and the board's conspiracy, a sophisticated plan designed to force him to choose between love and career. Between Emma and the company. The rumors about Emma. The strategies to undermine her. Everything had been orchestrated by Vanessa to win him back and reclaim the position she once had. Now, Alexander understood it all. The clarity he had lost when he first decided to protect Emma. The silence he maintained in the face of the board's criticisms, he now realized it was all a huge mistake. He had put business above what truly mattered. He had believed in professional rules. In dry strategies. But he had forgotten that love didn't thrive under such conditions. The guilt overwhelmed him as he thought about Emma. Who had left to avoid causing him more harm. But this couldn't continue. He couldn't let it end this way. He loved Emma. Not because of what she represented. But because of who she was, because of her heart. Her warmth. And the strength she gave him that he had never found in anyone else. A decisive thought formed in his mind. He would not let Emma go. He would not allow love to be torn apart by external pressures. He would stand up. Protect her. And show the world that he loved her without any conditions. The next day, the board of directors gathered for an important meeting about the company's future. But they had no idea that Alexander's presence would turn everything upside down. Mr. Blake. This is a critical time for us to discuss the company's next steps, one of the board members said coldly. But we cannot allow someone like Ms. Carter to continue to be by your side. Before anyone else could speak, Alexander stood up. His gaze firm. You don't need to remind me of what's appropriate, he said. His voice cold and strong. Emma Carter is not a tool for any of you to manipulate in your business strategies. The room fell silent. No one knew how to respond. But Alexander didn't stop. He continued. I love her. And I will not let you harm her or anyone I care about. The board members were stunned. They had never imagined that Alexander, a man who had always been calm and rational, would openly stand up against them. Against everything he had adhered to in the past. You cannot do this. Mr. Blake, one of the board members, protested. But Alexander looked at them with a steely gaze. Unwavering. I can do this. And I will, he declared firmly. I will not accept any pressure to marry for business gains. With that, he turned on his heel and left the meeting room. He didn't leave room for anyone to oppose him. He wouldn't let anyone stand in his way as he went to find Emma. Alexander didn't know exactly where Emma could be. But he knew she wouldn't be far. He understood her. Emma was not the type to leave without a trace. She wouldn't disappear for good. He immediately left the company. Driving through the familiar streets. Every corner. Every road. He looked for signs of her. The memories of their time together. Of the days spent working side by side. Sharing small joys. All made his heart ache. After a few hours, he realized he had no luck finding her in the usual places. But he refused to give up. He kept searching until he finally realized there was one place she might be, the little cafe where she used to work. When Alexander entered the cafe, where the soft golden light bathed the wooden tables, he saw Emma standing behind the counter. She looked at him. Her eyes filled with pain and disbelief. You shouldn't have come. Alexander. Emma said. Her voice trembling. I can't let you go. Alexander replied. Walking closer. I love you. Emma. I love you because you are you. I won't let anyone stop us anymore. Emma looked up at him. Her eyes filled with tears. But Alexander. I'm just an ordinary girl. You can't let the whole company be affected because of me. You are all I need, he said. His voice soft. Full of love. We'll get through everything together. I don't need anything but you. Emma looked at him. Her heart racing. She realized then that no matter how complicated the world outside was, true love was worth protecting. I love you, she whispered. And this time, nothing could stand in their way anymore. After days of searching, Alexander finally found Emma at a small art exhibition showcasing her debut collection. The gallery was filled with the soft hum of conversations, the clink of glasses, and the distant sounds of a piano playing. But amidst the crowds, it was her, standing proudly by her artwork, glowing in a way that only she could. Her paintings were not just images, they were her soul, poured out onto the canvas in strokes of passion and emotion. Alexander stood in the doorway, mesmerized. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. As though everything had led him to this very moment. She had made it. Emma. The girl who had always dreamed of sharing her art with the world, was now living that dream. Her courage, her passion, her dedication, it was all here in front of him. He took a deep breath. And with resolve in his heart, he walked toward her. Emma, he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. She turned toward him, her face lighting up with surprise and joy. I've been looking for you, he continued, his voice steady but full of vulnerability. And I found you. Here. In the place where you belong. Emma smiled, the warmth of her gaze softening the walls around her. I didn't expect you to come here, Alexander. I couldn't stay away, he admitted. He took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. I was wrong. I should have never let you go. Emma. I should have never let anything stand in the way of us. Tears began to form in Emma's eyes as she looked at him. The memories of their journey together flooding back, the struggles, the heartache, but also the love that had bloomed between them. Alexander, she whispered, as if unsure of what to say. I love you, he said, cutting her off softly. I love you, Emma. In a way I never thought was possible. You are the only one who brings meaning to my life. You are the reason I wake up every day with a sense of purpose. He knelt down on one knee, holding out a ring, the symbol of his unwavering commitment. The room seemed to freeze in time as every eye turned toward them. Emma Carter, he said, his voice strong and clear. Will you marry me? Will you be the one to share this life with me? Forever. A hush fell over the room as Emma looked down at him, her heart racing. For a moment, everything around them faded away, there was only the two of them, standing at the precipice of a new beginning. Tears spilled from her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. Alexander stood up, carefully placing the ring on her finger, his hands trembling with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the crowd erupted in applause. The day of their wedding was nothing short of magical. The venue was a charming, intimate space, an elegant garden lit with thousands of twinkling lights, surrounded by the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. The air was filled with love, and the people who mattered most to them were there to celebrate their union. Emma stood at the altar, her breath catching in her throat as she saw Alexander walking toward her. His dark suit contrasted beautifully with the soft, ethereal atmosphere around them. His gaze locked with hers. And for the first time, they were both completely free from the weight of expectations. There was no longer any need to prove themselves to anyone, only to each other. As he reached her, Alexander took her hands in his. You're beautiful, he whispered. his voice thick with emotion. "You're my everything," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The ceremony was simple, but every word was filled with meaning. They exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through the good times and the bad. To love and support one another no matter what life brought their way. "I promise to love you not just for who you are, but for who you make me become," Alexander said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "With you, I am whole." Emma smiled through her tears. "I promise to always believe in you, even when the world doubts us. With you, I am home." Their first kiss as husband and wife was met with cheers and applause. It wasn't just a kiss, it was the culmination of everything they had been through, every challenge, every tear, every moment of doubt. And now, they were standing together, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever the future held. The reception was full of laughter, dancing, and joy. The guests, from friends to family and even those who had once doubted their relationship, gathered to celebrate their love. Vanessa, who had once tried to tear them apart, stood in the back, silently watching, her plans long defeated. For Alexander and Emma, the past didn't matter anymore. They had forged their own path, together. The love they had was a love built on understanding, respect, and the willingness to fight for each other. As the night came to an end, Alexander and Emma stood together on the balcony, looking out over the sparkling lights of the city below. "Do you think everything happens for a reason?" Emma asked, resting her head on Alexander's shoulder. "I used to think that things just happened," Alexander replied, wrapping his arm around her. "But now I know, we make our own reasons. And this was always meant to be." Together, they looked out at the horizon, knowing that the future was theirs to create. And in that moment, as the stars twinkled above them, they felt the promise of forever in their hearts. The end of one journey, and the beginning of another, filled with love, hope, and an unbreakable bond.